So I have a few things to tie together here, and they have to do with the ideas of artificial intelligence and its ethical use alongside fitness for men over 40, as well as how this all ties in together through the use of, for example, voice recording. So here's the situation. There are a lot of people who are very cautious, if not taking a somewhat Luddite approach to the advancements in AI technology. And some people cite very specific use cases, such as the creation of content, which is understandable from the perspective if people are using it to create the entire content without any form of human input whatsoever, which a lot of that is being done. And of course, if the model that's being used is advanced enough that and has been tested enough that it creates natural sounding and natural reading text that could rival something that people could do, there really, or and I should say that humans, right, can produce, there really isn't much of an issue with it, because if we look at one of the reasons why we're consuming literature in the first place, it's either for personal development or entertainment or some otherwise personal enrichment education purpose. And if the document that is produced serves those purposes, there should be no issue taken with it, regardless of whether or not it's created by artificial intelligence. However, at the same time, if we do want to look at it from this perspective that there should be a human input should largely be considered in the production, specifically using generative AI to create content. I have a few specific case studies that are also turning into case histories from my own experimentation that are more proof of a concept of how the AI can be used in a more ethical and responsible way that does keep the human input, the human part of this type of creation, it keeps it into play. So, for example, we have one case where I created an entire artificial intelligence program, a course on fundamentals of generative AI, and it was using a generative AI, which was specifically ChatGPT 4.0. And it was a version that has a secondary license through an app called Nova AI. And through Nova AI, they also have the LLAM, the LAM from Meta. Also, what's available there is Sonnet. And also, they have a ChatGPT Mini and a ChatGPT 4. And so there's a bundle of bots in there. But the one that was used to generate the course was GPT 4.0. Now, what's interesting is that the more specific and systematic you keep the prompts, because basically there was one prompt that was made previously, so a week before, that was basically asking for an outline for a fundamentals of artificial intelligence or generative artificial intelligence course. And the inspiration for making that prompt was my receiving a certificate from Databricks and their fundamentals of generative AI, and then also a Databricks fundamental, which was a free course that anybody could take. It only will take you probably maybe 2 or 3 hours to finish the courses and get the certificates. But I just thought about how simple the certification process was through their videos and the text that they had, and how simple the test was. Basically, in a lot of ways, what you would call an open book test. You could take it as many times as you want to until you pass and get the certificate. So there was just one thing there, that it came from another source, from Databricks, had their own course, and then from that course was created the inspiration to prompt the outline for the Fundamentals of Generative AI course. And it took about 13 hours, where I just, from about midnight one night, I don't remember the exact date right now, I could look at it, and then until about 2 o'clock the following afternoon, which I know is 14 hours, but I consider that I took a break for an hour to eat. So that was a use case where, in one way, I saw that by generating the course and checking it, fact-checking it, everything that was generated in the course was legitimate. It actually is a course that, even though it's called a Fundamentals of Generative AI course, is actually sits at a level of where it's an intermediate to advanced. It's a very complete course, because not only does it break down all the different steps and information and knowledge about generative AI, but it also provides coding and a list of software and plugins to use to actually go ahead and do a project, so a hands-on project using generative AI. So it's actually a pretty comprehensive course. So that's just one use case there. Now, that didn't completely make the case, although I felt that it is a proof of concept how generative AI can be used to produce something that is valuable according to the criteria that I stated earlier, which is the same reasons why people read or consume any kind of literature or content in the first place, is because of its entertainment value, or it's educational, or it in some other way enriches the person who is consuming the content, right? So it can be educational, entertainment, so on and so forth. That's the whole purpose of it. In this case, the Fundamentals of Generative AI course is a comprehensive course that takes the person all the way through all of the knowledge base that they need to have, as well as a hands-on project that they can do using the generative AI. Okay, so now that's just one use case there, but one that's even more compelling, that actually is a much better proof of the concept here, that it can be used in a responsible, ethical way that maintains the human element. That's the term I was looking for earlier that escaped me. But it maintains the human element in a very strong and significant way, right? So I'd like to say that it maintains a significant human element in the creation of the content, was in looking at how to provide an explanation for a fitness course. So the fitness course has the name, and it's pretty much basically a wellness course with the name called Opulent Fitness Odyssey and Stress Transmutation, right? So basically what it is it is an elite fitness course and stress management service for men over 40. One of the first iterations was saying men 40 to 60 and so on and so forth, but we can just say that it's an elite fitness and stress management program for men over 40, right? And again, the name was called Opulent Fitness Odyssey and Stress Transmutation, right? Just to give it a little bit more of a flair and using the word opulent and so on and so forth in Odyssey for the higher income demographic and the high achievers who are maybe executives and or entrepreneurs, specifically men in their 40s. So one of the things that comes to mind because of the practical uses of something like this, and that everybody's starting at a different level in their what you could call fitness journey, is that people have to be built up to a certain level in gradients, or it has to be progressed through, right? For example, I was speaking on a platform called noonvibe to Kristen Brown, one of the very popular speakers and top coaches there. And on her show, something came up where the idea had come to me about how sometimes people look at the experiences that others have. For example, a lot of people are very open about their emotional trauma and experiences like that. And some people would look at that, me being one of them in the past, who would say, oh, why are you complaining about that? I went through the same thing and I'm not crying about it, and so on and so forth. However, at that moment when I was on her talk, a little wave of compassion came over me, and I was able to describe it in a way that made sense to me at the time, that I saw a different approach, which was being somebody who's been a fitness trainer and martial arts instructor. If I were to take somebody into the gym and put, let's say, 225 pounds, 315 pounds, whatever it is, on a bar on a squat rack, and just because I can do that doesn't mean that some newbie who's new to working out is going to be able to do that. And it's the same thing about how everybody is in their emotional, spiritual, and physical life, right? It's that people have to start where they are. You can't expect someone, just because the emotional burden that they had is similar to one, or maybe it could be even exactly the same that you had, doesn't mean that they are able to withstand it or to process it or to get through it in the same way that you are. Okay, so that's just one part of the concept there. Now, how does that translate over into men's fitness, specifically this elite fitness program for men over 40? Well, one of the things is, again, because it is a fitness program and because it more closely aligns with the example I gave, everyone has to start where they are. You have to build someone up. If someone is able to do only one push-up through consistent practice, if they are consistent and they're doing it in the right way, then eventually they can get up to 10, 20, 100, whatever, however many push-ups their goal is, right? And so this is the same thing that is required for any programs, even no less this elite fitness program. And some of the videos of demonstrations I've done were of me doing, one-armed back handsprings and pistol squats and butterfly kicks and, all of this crazy tornado spins and all this other stuff like that. And as a demonstration, because I'm 47, and one of the things that a lot of people, when especially on social media, you'll see them saying things like, for example, there was a young lady who was demonstrating some lower body exercises, some hip openers and some leg flexibility, agility, and strength exercises. And the summary of many of the comments was basically had this same vibe, which was, oh, I'd like to see someone who's not in their 20s doing that. And so I went ahead and demonstrated me, who's more than twice the 20s, right, 47, easily doing those movements without getting out of breath, without having any issue or struggles at all doing it, just playing like a child, because of coming from the perspective of knowing that, yes, it took me years to build up to that, but also I've been able to break it down and into a system where people can achieve those levels much more quickly than it took me, because of course, when you're in something and you're doing it, especially if you're paying attention, if you have enough awareness, and of course, that being my goal, I'm able to break it down into these gradients, these steps and progressions. And so now, again, I want to remind that how does this tie into the generative artificial intelligence, and how this makes this case, how these things all tie in together, is in this one interesting thing. So a lot of those examples about progression and working things through in gradients are also related to another industry that I'm very familiar with because I have a degree in clinical hypnosis. And one of the programs that I've used a lot, specifically for non-smokers and also for phobias, specifically the first phobia extinction that I worked on was someone who had an arachnophobia for 14 years. And the type of program that I used could fit under the category of a systematic desensitization. And again, this all speaks to the idea of gradients and steps and systemization and progression, right? And moving progressively into higher or more advanced levels of ability. So one of the examples that comes from my alma mater, the Hypnosis Motivation Institute, that we had learned about a very well-known psychiatrist and physician who also used hypnosis named Milton Erickson. One of the things that came to mind, because I wanted to give an example of how he had a debilitating case of polio when he was younger, I think about when he was a teenager, maybe 16 or 17, and he lost his ability to walk. And one of the stories that we heard and read about at the Hypnosis Motivation Institute was how he was determined to walk again, and so he watched people in his family learn how to walk, and he retrained himself systematically how to walk again. And so I decided that this was a very good example because it's an extreme example of someone regaining ability from having lost an ability. And that would be a really great example to use for people who may not be in that situation, who simply want to become more fit and have more mobility and so on and so forth in this program for elite fitness for men over 40, right? But if you use an extreme example, because part of my program is going to include the subconscious mind and the clinical hypnosis aspect as well as the fitness training, I found that is a very, very compelling use case for how hypnosis can be used complementarily with the fitness program. Because if someone who was a master at this, he's a physician, he was a psychiatrist, he used hypnosis to treat people's ailments and all different kinds, and he used it on himself to be able to learn how to walk again after being debilitated by polio, that is an excellent use case for this type of application. So again, circling back to how this applies to generative AI and how it makes a proof of anything, and talking about the human element. So for one, that story was only something that I recalled for the past 20 years or so. I don't actually know of any time that I've actually written about it or published about it, because it just seemed like an anecdote to me from what I recall, because I haven't had access to the reading material from the school that I went to is in a storage facility in California. And so, but it's been something that's been on my mind, a story that I know. So the way that I found that it could be used, I said, if this is true, and if generative AI is really taking information from real sources and simply, as I would say, putting it in its own words, right? And one of the examples I used for that was that any researcher, right? So one of the, if I explain it this way, is that the justification I gave for the proper use of using the generative AI was simply this, that if somebody goes to school or they're a researcher and they have to write a book or a paper, right? The thing that they will do is they will go to the library, they'll go to the bookstore, they'll get the books from school, they'll amass them together, they'll read through them, they'll take notes, they'll write down quotes and everything like that. And so they're taking information from different places, right? Putting it together and making it their own thesis, their own book. And so this is what generative AI in this case is doing, but much more quickly. And so that's the case that I'm making. If people can do it, right, by using other people's information from books, from libraries, from searching online, right, and then putting it together and making it their own, why then, it seems to be a disconnect, a little bit of a misunderstanding why that seems so wrong to be using generative AI just to simply make the process happen much more quickly. And so that's what happened with this anecdote that I had, right, or this understanding, which really, if we look into the history of Milton Erickson, we'll find that it's not an anecdote and that it actually is something that really happened and that's documented, right? But to me, it was just a story, a very compelling story that I had recalled. And so now, putting this into my own words, right, I formulated a prompt. And so I gave this prompt to a generative AI model, an open source AI model, which, by the way, there's a lot of controversy about it right now. It's the Chinese DeepSeek R1. And so there was actually a cyber attack on the DeepSeek R1 model. So, which, side note, it seemed to only affect users of iPhones and the iOS system, because I have both. I have what I'm recording on now is my Android device. It's a Samsung. And then I also have the software installed on my iPhone as well. But I attempted to generate using my prompt on my iPhone and it didn't work. It kept saying that the server was busy, but this was during the cyber attack. So just a little side note there. For some reason, it affected iOS and not the Android systems. So now the prompt, it's very interesting because this, to me, proves the case that when used in the proper way, that the AI really is taking real information and filling it out and making it its own. So it's actually putting it in its own words and making an original text, an original document, if you will. And so I'm only going to, right now, at first, I'll look at the DeepSeek R1's response to the prompt, and then I'll go into the GPT 4.0 response that I got. But this is the exact response, because I have it right here in front of me, that I spoke into the microphone, and this is what came out. So I asked, and first to GPT 4.0, but and then I wanted to ask to R1, but this is the one coming from R1 first, but it was the exact same prompt to both of them. And this was it. It was a question. The query was, are you able to find a historical story about a psychiatrist and hypnotist named Milton Erickson who retrained himself how to walk after having polio by watching babies in his family learn how to walk? That's the prompt. One more time. Are you able to find a historical story about a psychiatrist and hypnotist named Milton Erickson who retrained himself to walk after having polio by watching babies in his family learn how to walk? So DeepSeek R1 said, yes, I can provide a historical account of Milton Erickson's remarkable story. Milton H. Erickson, 1901 to 1980, was a pioneering psychiatrist and hypnotist known for his innovative approaches to psychotherapy and hypnosis. One of the most inspiring stories about Erickson involves his experience with polio and how he retrained himself to walk by observing the natural learning processes of infants. The story of Milton Erickson and polio. When Erickson was 17 years old, he contracted a severe case of polio, which left him paralyzed and bedridden. Doctors believed he would not survive, but Erickson defied the odds. However, he was left with significant physical limitations, including the inability to walk. Determined to regain his mobility, Erickson began a process of self-rehabilitation, observing babies to relearn walking. During his recovery, Erickson noticed that his younger sister's baby was learning to walk. He became fascinated by the natural trial and error process the infant used to develop motor skills. Erickson realized that the baby was not following a rigid set of instructions, but was instead experimenting, falling, and adjusting its movements based on feedback from its body and environment. Inspired by this observation, Erickson decided to apply the same principles to his own recovery. He began by focusing on small incremental movements, paying close attention to the sensations in his muscles and joints. He would visualize himself performing the movements and then attempt to replicate them, just as the baby did. Over time, he gradually regained strength and coordination. The role of hypnosis and mental focus. Erickson's experience with polio and his recovery also influenced his later work in hypnosis and psychotherapy. He developed a deep understanding of the mind-body connection and the power of focused attention. Erickson believed that the unconscious mind could be harnessed to facilitate healing and personal growth, a principle he applied both to himself and his patients. Legacy. Milton Erickson's ability to retrain himself to walk after polio is often cited as an example of his extraordinary determination and innovative thinking. His observations of the baby's learning process not only helped him recover physically, but also shaped his therapeutic techniques, which emphasized the importance of individual experience, creativity, and the unconscious mind. Erickson's work has had a lasting impact on the fields of psychotherapy and hypnosis, and his story continues to inspire those facing physical and psychological challenges. So, as you can hear and maybe we'll be reading, that is I think, an excellent use case of how and proves the point that I was attempting to make about how the AI, as long as it's based on facts or at least readily available information, can take a simple prompt, even something that was a memory of mine, however significant memory of mine, and turn it into a small essay based on that information, because the story it's a true historical account of how this person used hypnosis to rehabilitate himself physically. And that right there is how hypnosis is ethically and responsibly used, because it's not just a person who doesn't know anything. So the case that's a problem, I think, that most people think is happening is that people are just going out there and just making stuff up, or that they don't really have any experience with. Like, right, for example, I have a degree in clinical hypnosis. I'm a practicing master hypnotist. I've had clients, so on and so forth. I am a fitness trainer, a martial arts instructor, so on and so forth. So these things are actually what I do, right? I think the problem that many people were having is that they feel like someone who doesn't have any real expertise is going to then decide they want to write a book or create an essay or create some content. They're going to prompt the AI with some idea that they have no knowledge about, and then produce this content and publish it out there, and then that's it. So again, I don't know. That is a something that I might need to think about a little bit more, because I'm not sure that I have any issues with that, as long as the next step that I'm going to talk about is applied. So here's something that I think that actually takes away from any negative issues with that kind of generative AI production. And it is this idea that, going back to how people can study in school, if you go to school, or if you're doing a research report, if you're a research scientist or whatnot, you would start to look at different books, different research papers, so on and so forth. And you will come across things that you've never seen before, right? But in order to become familiar with it and make it your own information, right, what you're going to have to do is read and understand the material. So then you can then take it, distill it, blend it, mix it, make it your own, and write your thesis, write your research paper, write your book. So my understanding is, my suggestion for this is that if somebody is going to create information through a prompt that they have no expertise or mastery in, it's not a problem if that's how they end it. I mean, it's not a problem if they continue in the next process, is what I meant to say. It's a problem only if that's the way they end it. However, if they take this next suggestion, right, and read the document from beginning to end, right, so-called cover to cover if they create a book, right? And they then understand that information just as if they were in school, and they're making it their own, right? And that they're able to then have a discussion about that, right? As if it's their own, because that's really what happened, except it just was a prompt that brought them that information much more quickly. So instead of them having to look through 50 books or whatever, it could be 5 books, they made a single prompt that summarized and brought all of the information to them in a text document, right? So now they take that, they study that, they make that their own, because of the way that generative AI works, it has created an entirely new document in its own words by taking that information and creating something completely